So a very big welcome. My name is Leah Wing, and I'm the co-director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution that is hosting Cyberweek 2020. We're in our 22nd year of hosting this virtual free international gathering for people to talk about using technology and dispute resolution. It's also being sponsored by many organizations, academic and non-academic institutions. We thank all of them. Particular shout out to the University of Massachusetts that's hosting it, and Mediate.com. I also have my fellow troublemakers, Colin Rule and Noam Ebner, who were the program committee with me for the setup of Cyberweek, and I thank them for all the incredible work they've done to build this week. We have an amazing panel that we're going to be meeting with today, and I'd like to do an introduction of them, and then we'll get started. But the very first thing I'm going to do before we pull our attention to them is say that we have an announcement of an award that went to a student, and today is really a day to celebrate the next generation of scholars and practitioners. And this panel is includes three amazing folks, and they're just the tip of the iceberg of the people who are pushing the next generation of thinking. So I would just like to say the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution and Cyberweek is happy to announce that Diana Itzel Santana Galindo won the Newbert Prize in International Arbitration for their paper on ODR. This prize is managed by the Faculty of Law at McGill University. And this prize winner for this year was a student of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution Fellows, Dan Rainey's ODR course at McGill, at the McGeorge School of Law at the University of the Pacific. And her article is entitled "The Role of Seat in Smart Contract Disputes." And you can find a copy in the most recent edition of the International Journal for Online Dispute Resolution. We're hoping to have more student-oriented issues, maybe one every year or every other year. So anyone who's a student now or considering being a student, please keep an eye out for that. But also we want to celebrate and encourage student scholarship, so I encourage you to take a look at that. It is also, by popular demand, going to be republished in an issue in 2021 for ICC's Dispute Resolution Services Journal. So congratulations to Diana. It's a wonderful way to begin a presentation by celebrating young scholars' success. So with that, right on, Paul, thanks for your claps. Let me share my screen and bring up the slides so that we can see who's going to be presenting. And then I'm going to not take any more time and turn it right over to them. So I'm merely moderating, but we have, as I said, an outstanding panel. Chimdimma is from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and already a certified mediator and arbitrator practicing in Nigeria. We wish her and her country well during this very challenging time. And then two folks in this country during our challenging time are April and Joshua. April's also located at the University of Missouri School of Law and undertaking a graduate certificate in their organizational change and conflict management. Big shout out, University of Missouri is definitely in the house tonight. And then we have Josh, as I said, who's at Santa Clara University and already has many years experience as a communication and smart building systems designer. And I think we're going to hear more about how he's employed that thinking and experience to ODR. So without further ado, Picasso gives us a wonderful image for thinking about what contemplation can be used to turn into action. And I hand it over now to Chimdimma to talk about the challenges and issues with online dispute resolution.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wing. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to thank the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution for having me this week. It's an amazing opportunity, and I'm really excited about this session and the other sessions for the week. So ODR has become a hot topic now, especially with the outbreak of the coronavirus. Everyone is talking about online dispute resolution. There's so many webinars being organized all over the world, talking about ODR proceedings, talking about ODR in general, even a lot of certification trainings in online dispute resolution. So right now, ODR has become really popular. In fact, I was speaking with some people a few months back, and they believe that the field of online dispute resolution was developed solely as a way to get through the pandemic. So it came into being this year, just for us to find a way to get through the pandemic. And I think that leads us to one of the issues with online dispute resolution, and that is lack of awareness. Especially here in Nigeria, how many people actually know about online dispute resolution? And how many people are actually willing to learn about ODR? I was speaking with some colleagues about a year ago, and I was talking to them about online mediation, online arbitration, and they didn't let me get far. They didn't really let me talk about it that much. They just shut it down from the beginning that it's not possible. I mean, mediation needs a personal touch. You need to be in the room with the parties. How do you do this online? How can you mediate over the internet? So nobody was willing to really accept this until, of course, the pandemic came with lockdown, restriction and movement. We had to move a lot of our in-person interactions online to embrace online dispute resolution. But now that the novelty of the coronavirus is wearing off, people have begun to they've started reversing back to physical interactions. So I think lack of awareness is the critical challenge for online dispute resolution, because a lot of people are actually resistant to change as well. Nobody wants to move with the times. I think it was sometime last year, my organization, because I work with the Institute of Chartered Mediators and Conciliators in Nigeria, we had this conference, so like December 2019, and of course we had the website for people to go online, register, put in your card details, make payments, and of course have your pass to attend the conference. So there was this lady that called me asking for help to register. So I just told her, I sent her the link, just go online, register. I sent her step-by-step guides with pictures that will help her register. She said, okay, she thanked me, and she hung up. So about 10 minutes later, she called me back that she still needs help. So I was okay, which step are you at? Let me help you. And she said, no, I need you to do this for me. I want you to register for me, pay for me on your own. I'll send you the money. So I asked her why. Is there any particular reason? Are you having issues? Do you have network problems? And she said, no, that I'm afraid of the internet. So there are a lot of people like her as well. So no matter what I told her, she refused to do the registration herself. I had to do it for her. And after that, a lot of people kept calling me the same thing. I'm worried, I'm concerned, I don't feel safe putting my details out there. I'm worried about using online platforms. So there's this general mistrust of online platforms, especially in Nigeria, particularly with the rates of cybercrime. So a lot of people are worried about putting their information out there. And because, of course, these online platforms, everybody's worried about having your information recorded, because when you're having physical, in-person meetings, it's easier, relatively easier to keep the contents of the session confidential. But when it's online, you're not exactly sure of how much information is going to be out there. You're worried, is someone recording me? How confidential is this going to be? Because even having someone in the room, because right now you're seeing me, but you're not sure if there's someone sitting beside me listening to everything we're talking about. So even having someone in the room with you, or even recording or taking screenshots, sort of breaches this confidentiality. So that's another issue with online dispute resolution. People are worried about privacy, worried about confidentiality, worried about having their information leaked to the public. Because especially with alternative dispute resolution, one of the benefits is the privacy it affords you. So when you go online, of course, you're worried about your information being disclosed without your permission. Another issue with online dispute resolution is also inadequate infrastructure. I think with when we started moving our offline interactions online, especially in Nigeria, that's when it occurred to us that we lack the infrastructure that we need. Our internet can be very unstable. A lot of times we're in meetings, we drop out of meetings, our internet is unstable. Sometimes the whole day you can't really log in, especially now because I work in trainings. So we've had to move most of our trainings online. So it's been very difficult. We can have a class of 15 people and at about maybe 2 hours in, 7 people have dropped out of the training. So it's very difficult sometimes. So I think that has really brought our issues to the fore. Now we understand that we have very unstable network. And of course, these network issues, these technical issues affect how the sessions will run. So naturally, when we have very unstable network, it can be very frustrating, especially if you're in a mediation and the mediator happens to drop out of the session. So it can be very frustrating and a bit difficult to coordinate. Then that's another problem. We have difficulty in coordinating because when you're having like in-person sessions, we're already used to that. But when you're moving online, it's a completely different terrain. So you need to employ different techniques, different strategies, different skills to be able to manage the session. About 3 weeks ago, as part of my program at Mizzou, my non-binding methods class, we had this simulation. It was a multi-party negotiation with about 6 different groups that had to come online and handle a negotiation where we decided on about 6 different issues. So when we were preparing, I was a bit skeptical because I was worried about how we're so many of us in the room are going to be able to negotiate and arrive at some sort of agreement. I was a bit worried about how we'll manage the time, whether we'll be talking over each other. So we came into the Zoom room, then we had one person that was sort of like coordinating the negotiations. So what she did was she had each of us give like a brief opening statement, just 3 minutes each, just introduce yourself, tell us what you want, then let's move on. So when we did that, we were able to narrow down what exactly we're negotiating on, just down to 6 issues. So she shared her screen, had a document open, and listed these 6 issues. So once we explained our position, she puts our names beside each issue. So that way we're able to tell, okay, on this particular issue, we're 4 here, we still need 2 people to agree. On this particular issue, I'm the only holdout. So from there, we're able to move, give concessions here, stand our ground on this point. So from time to time, she kept drawing our attention to this. Okay, so on this issue, we need one more person who's willing to concede on this issue. So it was a bit easier to coordinate. So we knew what exactly we were doing. If not, we've just been all of us in the room, just talking over each other. So it's been really difficult. So we need those additional skills to be able to effectively coordinate a session, which also presents a challenge because we're used to one thing. So it's a bit difficult moving to a different terrain, which brings in trainings. Trainings are very important. A lot of people try to bypass training because they feel it's really expensive, but professional certifications are expensive because they're worth it. So trainings are very important because I feel like our neutrals need to understand exactly how these platforms work to be able to help the parties. So people that don't really understand how to use Zoom won't even be able to use Zoom to handle a mediation. And if you don't know how to use these platforms, it's best you get the training you can get or have someone else, like a co-mediator or a secretary, a registrar that can help coordinate the proceedings. So when people don't invest in trainings, they don't fully understand, they won't really be able to help. So they need to be able to be familiar with these platforms, be able to assist the parties in resolving their disputes. Then very important, ODR design. I sincerely applaud platforms like Craig, Modron Spaces, because I believe a lot has gone into designing those platforms. As part of our program, we've been able to test out Craig, Tructs, Next Level Mediation, so many platforms part of our program at Mizzou. And I saw how, especially with Craig, it was seamless. It was a beautiful platform. And I saw how technical it was. I can imagine how technical it is for the administrators to manage these platforms. So when you think of what it took them to be able to build these platforms, this is not relatively easy to replicate. I have a colleague that tried to build an ODR platform, and right now we're having so many problems because of the way it was structured. So he has spent so much money and he can't really use the platform because of the way it was structured. It's a bit difficult. It wasn't really structured properly. And I think this is a common issue, a common difficulty in designing an ODR system. Because when you compare it with physical ADR centers, for instance, in Nigeria, there are so many ADR centers springing up all over the country. We have over 12, 14 court-connected ADR centers as the multi-door courthouses. Then we have so many private ADR centers. I can count over 15 private ADR centers we have in the country alone. So while I won't say that they're easy, it's not easy to establish a physical ADR center, but when you compare it to an online system, I believe it's relatively easier to establish a physical center than an online system. So it's really easier to replicate these physical ADR centers, but a lot goes into building an ODR platform, which makes it more difficult, especially when you have to design something that suits the needs of your public, of the users. But with a physical center, you have the venue, you develop your rules, it's a bit easier. With an online system, even after you build the system, you need to be able to find people that really know how to use the platform. So these are some issues I've been able to identify with online dispute resolution. But I still believe that it's a growing field. A lot of recommendations have been made. It just needs people to be interested, people willing to try and to continue to develop the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chimdimma. That was outstanding. You gave us a wonderful overview of both some really significant challenges that we're facing, but also some compliments about what's been accomplished from your perspective. And just want to say that we open it up if there's a couple questions or comments. We'll take a couple minutes after each speaker, and then at the end we can have more questions and discussion. So are there any specific questions for Chimdimma after her presentation? You're welcome to put it in the chat, or you can just speak out, whatever you prefer.
I have a quick question for you, Chimdimma. You did a beautiful job. My question is, with the example that you gave us of the individual who is afraid of the internet, and you said that you're specifically in trainings, what is it that your organization or you are offering people to give them a level of comfortability with the internet or with online mediation or arbitration or whatever type of ADR you're doing? Is there something that you all have found useful to encourage the use of technology for dispute resolution?
Okay, thank you, April. So what we've done mostly is to make it as simple as possible. Because initially we designed like an e-learning platform for the Institute, but a lot of people are having difficulties trying to use it. So we had to like ask people, okay, what are you more comfortable with? So with webinars all over the place, Zoom has become really popular. So people are more comfortable with Zoom. So we decided to do the trainings via Zoom. So even when we started doing our trainings on Zoom, we keep speaking with the participants. So people call, they don't know how to log in. Some people don't know how to turn on their audio. Some don't know how to turn on their videos. So we're constantly staying in touch with them. So even now, today, we had a training running this week. And today, for about 30 minutes, I was speaking with one man that didn't know how to connect to audio. So it can be really challenging. We just try to be as patient as we can and just use the simplest platform possible. Then, of course, we don't record the training session because some people were uncomfortable with it. They won't be able to ask questions or answer questions. So we stopped recording our training sessions. So we just keep adapting. Whatever makes people comfortable, we keep taking recommendations, continue to adapt to make people more comfortable.
So there's a comment in the chat from Jamie McMullen. It says, extremely thought-provoking and important presentation. These are universal concerns, so well expressed. I agree, and I was also thinking, if you wouldn't mind pondering out loud some thoughts regarding infrastructure. You brought up such an important point, which is outside the hands of most dispute resolution centers, of course, or practitioners or faculty working in programs teaching about dispute resolution and technology. But what thoughts do you have about either policies or next steps for either business or government or a partnership between them regarding enhancing infrastructure? Because I've had the same experience training people online, and then in the middle of a series of role plays, having mediators disappear, or even if you have one disputant disappear, you can't continue with the role play. And this is just for training. So in real cases, that's a dilemma as well. So do you have any thoughts regarding infrastructure?
Okay, so for infrastructure, especially with the internet, because it's a serious problem, our internet can be really, really unstable. We have meetings and we just drop out. Sometimes you can't get back in, you're done for the day. So sometimes it's our fault because some people don't invest in a strong internet connection. We have people that use 2G because most of the time we have trainings, we always advise people from the beginning, try to have a minimum of 3G. And please try to log in from a computer. If you're logged in from your phone, calls will come in and interrupt the session. But some people just refuse. I'm more comfortable on a phone, or I don't own a computer, I don't own a tablet. So some people can't even afford to have this other equipment. And some that do, don't even know how to use it. We tried to get someone to download Zoom, and at the point he refused to do the training. He asked me, can you come and install it for me? So no, you can just go to the Play Store and download it. It's okay, do I have to pay for it? So it took a lot of back and forth, and eventually he just refused that. Whenever you're ready to resume your physical trainings, I will do it then, but I'm not doing it right now. So sometimes I think it's our fault as well. We need to try to step it up a bit, but unfortunately our network can just be really bad.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So shall we move to the next presentation? And here I'll share my screen for just one moment and say that our next presenter is April, who will talk about traditional and emerging ethical considerations for ODR.
Great, thank you. I am Gen X, which means I don't know a lot about technology, just enough to be dangerous. And so I'm going to do my best here. I'm also a litigator by training and practice, did that for about 10 years. And then my husband, his work assignments took us overseas for about 5 years in Southeast Asia. So I stepped away from the practice of law. And when I started thinking about coming back into it, one thing that I guess a bad taste that I left law with was that in handling disputes, one, I never went to trial. In the 10 years that I practiced, I never went to trial. Everything was either settled or negotiated or resolved, never had a case dismissed through a court system. It was all some type of ADR settlement, and which was fantastic, but also left me as a trial lawyer feeling like there had to be a better way. And I was really missing out on some of the basics in terms of skill sets. And so that's why I entered the dispute resolution program at the Missouri School of Law. And it's been a really eye-opening experience for me. And I'm very happy to be a part of this community. It is an international community and one that I've gotten a lot of just experience and exposure from other students. And so I thank Chimdimma and others that are here internationally educating us, and thank you for your time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ODR and ethics. And I know that this is a subject that most people here are familiar with and has been talked about. Always seems to be, it's a part of a Cyberweek or an online conference or an in-person conference, but that's because it's so important. And it's because ODR, even though we're in our 22nd year of the Cyberweek, it's constantly evolving and changing, and even more so now. And here I am talking about not being able to use technology, and I'm trying to figure out how to switch the slide. Okay, there we go. So, and I'm not even sure exactly what all you all are seeing here. Let me see if I can get this out of the way. Okay. I put here just a slide of what are considered, I think, standard ethics. I had traditional ethics, but traditional seemed a little too old-fashioned of a word to put in for something that seems so new and cutting edge, although probably Professor Wing and Colin Rule and others would say, no, we've had ODR for a really long time. People just haven't realized that they're using it. I know that Colin Rule likes to say that ODR is ADR, and we can see that in a lot of these standard or traditional ethics. And that's access to justice, efficiency, transparency, satisfaction, quality of solutions. And we've got a lot of it here in this spreadsheet. Some are a little bit on the newer side. I would say integration, both online and offline with other systems, and innovation and being adaptable, improving the delivery of services, dispute resolution services. So those tend to be probably a little bit newer maybe than some of these others. But a lot of these are kind of founded in maybe the more traditional legal system and alternative dispute resolution. And I think that's where we see the connection between ADR and ODR. But there is, I think, some emerging ethics that are specific to ODR, and I'm going to get into those in a minute. So I'm not going to say a lot about each of these individual ethics just because of time constraints. But for those who aren't familiar with these, please take a look at the iCoder standards. I've got the links down here, icoder.org, and the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, their ethical principles at odr.info, ethics and ODR. And these are really meant to inform, guide, inspire best practices. Professor Wing has said they're higher order values. It's not for accountability measures, but it's really to give some extra, I think, to help programmers and practitioners really think about what they need in their practice and what they're designing in their program and how it's going to work with their stakeholders. For a really good look, I guess, at standard ethics, I'd like to recommend Professor Wing's article, Ethical Principles for Online Dispute Resolution, a GPS device for the field. It's in the International Journal of Online Dispute Resolution, and we can share that citation with you, but that's just a really great article. If you don't have a background in this and want to get up to speed, please take a look at that. So what I'm sharing with you here is just a little bit of a sneak peek. Let's see if I can get rid of this here. This is through iCoder. It's a joint effort through iCoder, NCTDR, and the American Bar Association ODR Standards Task Force. And my advisor for my externship is Professor Amy Schmitz, and she is on the ABA ODR Task Force. And it's through her that I was able to connect with Professor Wing and help them on this project that they're working on. And so this is just to give you a sneak peek of what I've been working on. I'm so sorry, I'm trying to get this toolbar out of the way so that you guys can get a good look at this. But what we have here is an ODR criteria index. And what we're doing is on the left-hand side, we have 13 documents from different organizations, from the European Union, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, from Mexico, from the United States, scholars, the American Bar Association, and all of these sources are pretty much specific to online dispute resolution. And they are putting forth or analyzing ethics in the ODR field. And you will see across the top that we have numbered here, and I think right now I'm only showing maybe 1 through 17, but we've got what those criteria are that are mentioned or put forth in their source document. And you can see accessible, fair, neutrality, security, transparency, accountability, and it just goes on. We have right now a total of 65 attributes that we have cataloged. And if it gets mentioned one time in a document and it states that it is an ethic principle guideline best practice, it's going into really this index. And so from this survey of these sources, what we've done is tabulate the data of how often these attributes are showing up. So you can see for accessible that it is showing up in 12 of the 13 documents. It's got a 92% rate of use or being called out. And let's take a look real quick at the very top line, Civil Justice Council. They have 10 overall criteria of the 65 that they have issued. And you can see there that accessible is one, efficient, affordable, trustworthy, and so on. In addition to this document, which is meant to be a resource for people to kind of take a look at what other institutions are putting out, and then scholars, we also have some additional sheets in the workbook, including definitions and notes, so that if you want to get a deeper dive into what each of these sources say about accessibility or evaluation or protection, you can go specifically to that comment and see how they define it, how they intend for it to be applied. And then we also have a list of citations and links for all of these documents so that you're not out there. Some of these are international documents and they aren't necessarily readily available or easy to find, or you might have to have a subscription, but all of the links currently work so that you can get access to those documents and review them in PDF form, unless it's on a current website. And then the last one that I created was a worksheet of the 65 criteria. It can be added to as more criteria is added to this document, but it's a worksheet so that if someone has a document and they're reviewing it, they can go through and then just check off and make notations of all of those criteria just for ease of use. And that was a big, I guess, factor in working with this document and trying to kind of revamp it a little bit, was that there was ease of use and that it was efficient, and just taking some of those standards even from ODR and making it accessible for individuals with disabilities or other limitations, and so that it could be a really great resource and workable document. So one thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was, I guess the main thing I wanted to talk about was the emerging ethics that I noticed in taking a look at those 65 criteria and those 13 documents, and just other documents as well. And I'm not going to go through every one because of time, and I know a lot of you have a lot of expertise in this area, but a couple things that I did want to point out that I think we're going to hear more about, especially in the era of COVID. And people using and being forced to use online dispute resolution. The first one is accessibility. And that's, I think typically when we've thought about accessibility, it's been for low income individuals or people who don't have access to education or resources. But now when we talk about accessibility, we're still talking about those things, but we're adding an additional layer to that. And that's accessibility for individuals with some type of physical, intellectual, or other disability that limits their ability to use the web or other ODR platforms or interfaces. I'm not going to say much about this because we have the expert on this presenting tomorrow, and that is David Larson. We also have a link in the agenda to an article that he co-authored with Lainey Feingold specifically about this topic. But one big issue that I think designers need to be taking a look at, and other people who are putting forth platforms, is your platform meeting web accessibility standards? And there are standards out there for accessibility, and I am sure that David will be talking about that tomorrow. The second one that I heard a lot about in Professor Schmitz's dispute resolution in the digital age class is fitting the forum to the fuss. And that's really about whether or not your ODR platform is proficient. And UNCITRAL has said that ODR should not impose costs, delays, burdens that are disproportionate to the economic value that is at stake. And so one thing that we need to be, I guess a few things we need to take a look at when we're looking at ODR processes are they simple? Are they fast? Are they flexible? Are they adaptable? And should they be used if we've got small claims or things that just aren't a high dollar value? I think cross-border, I'm not really going to go into that other than to say that last year, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation came out with model rules. And these are the only rules that I've been able to find, although there's probably more that are in the works right now, where it provides for an ODR framework for business to business disputes, where businesses will, ODR providers will agree to follow the framework and the model rules, and there is accountability for it. So that one is kind of cutting edge and pretty new. So that one's pretty exciting. Something that I hear discussed in probably every conference or webinar that I've attended this year in terms of ODR is user-centered design. And it's discussed frequently in terms of public and court systems, I think more so right now. But overall, are the ODR platforms that are being created taking into account or really just directly using input from the individuals who are going to be using that system? The public, is it public focused? Or are they talking to their advocates if it's in domestic violence context or low income housing, or maybe you've got individuals who can't readily address this, but their advocates can. And is the system rigorously user tested so that once it's actually been designed and created, that you have the public coming in and using it? And one thing that, one example that hit home for me was in the British Columbia with their system when they were talking, when they, I guess it was more lawyers and people in the justice system who put the system together. And when users came in to use it, they couldn't understand it because it was all legalese and in a format that wasn't intuitive to someone outside of the legal sphere. And so it wasn't plain language. So they had to go back and rework the system to really take out, I guess, some of those legalese and those things to really have it work for the majority of people. One thing that interests me in terms of emerging ethics is what's called the staged approach. And I think in ODR, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that individuals don't know a lot about ADR or that there's terms for the process that they're going through. Negotiation, mediation, facilitation, even arbitration. To them, they have a problem, they need resolution, they need someone to help them. And all they know is that they're not in a court, they're working with, somebody else to help them. And so in online dispute resolution, I think we can really blur the lines of what process or what stage we're in. And we're also starting to see hybrid stages. And I think there needs to be, I guess, a greater focus on what information we're sharing with users, how we're educating them about the process and what it means for the resolution of their case. Is this binding, not binding, voluntary? Can they opt out of it if they don't like it? Can they ask for a different mediator or negotiator if they don't like the one that they've been assigned to them? So there's just a lot of information there that I think needs to be shared with the users, and we're going to see more people talking about maybe defining a little bit better what stage our users are in. Guided triage and proactive problem solving is something that I've seen come up 2 or 3 times and in more recent publications. And it tends to be more in the court context. But in our class with Professor Schmitz, we also saw it in terms of designers using drop-down menus and other fields to guide users to adequately describe what their problem is, what their conflict is, what resolution they're seeking, put in their information, and some good resources on this. Roger Smith and then also the Joint Technology Committee came out with some guidelines, but also said that ODR platforms should enable consumers or parties to easily educate themselves about their rights, evidentiary obligations, procedural steps, likely outcomes, and whether they need assistance or representation. That's a lot going on for drop-down menus in different fields, but I know that in our class, we have viewed some programs, some ODR platforms that do an excellent job of doing that, and that's something to keep in mind. So I know I'm close on time. I just quickly want to talk about 3 things that I think kind of go together. And this is algorithm support, scalability, and trust marks. And just that we talk a lot about users, but we also need to be talking about merchants and e-commerce and the people who are getting or solving the dispute resolution. And so any ODR platform really needs to be scalable for the merchant when they have high volumes of cases. How can we use algorithmic support to take that data and quickly, efficiently resolve the majority of cases? And then for those cases that are more problematic, high end, maybe don't fit the coding, those need to go into more of a traditional mediation or some kind of facilitated conflict resolution system. And that gets me to the trust mark. Colin Rule and Amy Schmitz have a new book out, The New Handshake, Online Dispute Resolution and the Future of Consumer Protection. And it presents an idea for a trust mark. And what the trust mark really does is it gives the user, and Chimdimma touched on this, I think comfortability and confidence that the system that they are using is safe and effective for their dispute resolution, that the information that they're sharing is going to be confidential, or if not fully confidential, if there's going to be information that's gathered, it's at least going to be anonymized so that it doesn't give identifiable information about the user. So I encourage people to check out that book. Okay, I know I've said a lot and I've thrown a lot at you. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much. Perhaps we can take a moment for a question, and then, as I said, we'll have some time at the end, but I want to make sure that we have got time for Josh's important presentation as well. But thank you, April. First of all, I just want to thank you so much. It was an enormous contribution to the field that you built on the beginnings document that folks from Pew put together for the ABA and our collaboration with them. And you've made it, just move to a whole nother level. So it was a contribution to the field. And thank you for your presentation. It helps move the conversation forward and even give some new language and new framing for us to think about ethical issues. Are there any comments? You're welcome to put them in the chat, or just feel free to jump in and make a comment or ask a question. All right, well, I'll jump in and I'll just say, April, I know this will be hard, but if you had to narrow down the top one or two that you think is either most urgent or has the most promise, however you want to, is most pregnant for next steps for us to attend to, however you want to frame it, where do you think that we ought to go next?
I think the two that,
but if you could just comment on one or two that you think.
Yeah, I think the two that really excite me, let me put it that way, are user-centered design, and really for designers, bringing in the people that this system is meant to help and making sure it actually does that. And that touches on so many different ethics, user design. So I think that kind of encapsulates a lot of those in terms of, accessibility and comfortability, education, triage. When someone gets into the system, is it going to be intuitive for them to use it? And are they going to have satisfaction with it at the end of it so that they would recommend it to other people, thereby building up the trustworthiness of ODR in the program? I mean, if they can go to their mom or their friend or someone and say, hey, I was able to resolve this dispute, and it was quick and it was efficient and it was easy. I mean, quite honestly, we might put lawyers out of business. So that's kind of exciting. One I forgot to mention is auditing for effectiveness, and that's doing self audits by the providers, but also external auditing. And that's kind of goes in with that trust mark. Right now, there is not an overarching body or organization that's dealing with the accountability of ODR and who's resolving these disputes. And that's because it's such a vast field. We've got business to consumer, business to business, media. I mean, in some respects, I don't know where you would begin. This is where we are beginning. We're trying to get it out there with iCoder and the National Center and UNCITRAL and the ABA. It's a joint effort, that's just incredible that there are that many organizations working together. They think it's such an important issue, ethics and how we're delivering services, that I do believe it's only a short matter of time, much like we saw with the APEC model rules, that you will start to see some type of affiliation or program that's put out there, and people are going to want to get that trust mark or that accreditation or that, stamp of approval that says, yes, this is a trustworthy organization or provider.
Thank you so much. And I see a parallel between your comment around trust and the importance with accountability that we can bring around ethics, and Chimdimma's discussion about trust and lack of trust before, and how important it is to build trust as well. So thank you. So certainly not least, but last is among our presenters is Josh. So I will give you his title, Creating an Equitable Outcome for Internet Outages, and hand it over to Josh.
Well, thank you very much. I will take the screen and, all right. At this point, I believe everybody should be seeing slides. So I come from a slightly different background than many that attend law school. I came from designing technology systems. In fact, I think Lynn Johnson mentioned earlier how he's designed technology for courthouses and dispute resolution rooms in courthouses. I've also had the privilege of being involved in some of the design of those systems. And when I look at how technology integrates into our lives, I started asking a lot of questions, and ultimately it led me to law school. But when I ended up taking Colin Rule's online dispute resolution course at Santa Clara, one of the things that I kept drawing on was this is a low-cost alternative for those that don't necessarily have access to courts, don't have the time, don't have the resources to devote to seeking that equitable outcome. And then I started looking at the fact that, well, a lot of those people are still suffering through the same issue of not having equitable access. And so I started looking at what happens when your internet goes out. Because for many people, they just think, oh, it's an inconvenience, it'll go back on. But what are the real harms that come from this? And so what I'm looking at here is designing a new system potentially that creates some form of equity for those users when they lose access to the internet. Because once you lose access to the internet, as we'll see, you lose access to a lot of things, particularly now under a pandemic. So isn't the internet grand? How can you hate it? It does so many wonderful things. COVID drove the world online. So many people working from home, so many people accessing school from home, access to the courts, access to dispute resolution, access to groceries and basic household goods. All of this is coming from your home. You're accessing it via the internet. But as I said, not all access is equal. And in the United States in particular, we have a massive issue with not understanding who literally has internet access. According to an FCC report as of 2019, we were looking at 21.3 million lacked access to basic broadband services. According to Broadband Now, we're talking 42 million. According to Microsoft, it's 162.8 million people that do not have access to broadband services. And a lot of this comes down to, we just don't know because of how the data is measured. When you're looking at the FCC data, they base access to a broadband internet connection as one household in one census block. Then the entire census block is served. That's how they measure it. And that doesn't even mean that that person is a subscriber to that service. It just means that that access exists. So you're adding a lot of people into that system that may not actually have broadband services. I know certain friends in very urban areas, Sacramento is one in particular, they have access to DSL on their street. That's all that's available to them. But one street over is fiber internet to the home. And nobody's going to move that fiber line to their street. It's just not in the cards. And this just keeps becoming more and more divided, particularly when you're looking at the fact that the monopoly issue comes into play. And we hear monopoly a lot right now because of the congressional hearings over big tech, Google and Amazon. But the internet service providers, the monopolies, you're talking about 68 million people have one choice for broadband services. That's it. And in rural communities, the access to broadband significantly lower than urban areas. And recently, we just had AT&T announce that they're going to kill their DSL services. So Anybody who currently has DSL will be able to continue it, but anybody who wants to sign up moving forward will not be allowed to by AT&T. So we're going to start seeing people disconnecting, and in many of those cases, for those DSL customers of AT&T, we're talking about people whose only recourse then would be to use cellular technology, would be to use their cell phone plans in order to find their ways to connect to the outside world. And a lot of this comes to a big issue of unbalanced bargaining power. The internet service providers decide where they want to provide their services. You'll note that you don't see the big companies like Comcast, like Verizon, Frontier, and Charter. They don't compete in many of the same areas. They've divided up the country in many regards to ensure that they are servicing their customers and not going up against a competitor to drive down their prices. They also decide what services to provide. Like I said, AT&T is deciding it no longer wants to provide DSL services. Internet service providers create those contract agreements, and we're going to get into one of those in just a moment. Whereas consumers' bargaining power is extraordinarily low. They can choose from whatever the options that are available to them, but as we said, 68 million people only have one option. Consumers pick the plan they can afford. So it could be that they're only looking at very, very minimal services, 10 megabit down, 1 megabit upload. Your basic broadband measurement is 25 megabits down, 3 megabits upload as determined by the Federal Communications Commission. That is their standard by which they measure what the service provided is. And when you look at how much that takes up in terms of if you have two people working from home and a child trying to go to school and all of you have Zoom meetings, your broadband is going to be crushed and your access to those services is going to have substantial issues. Now, there are some subsidies that might be able to be available to help people that are having difficulty affording, but recently the FCC's reclassification of broadband as a Title I, essentially as a non-Title II regulatory service, removed those subsidies from federal subsidy issues that they could provide. And we put ourselves in a position where now we're facing some of the highest costs in the world in terms of providing broadband services. And as a side note, cost is one of the things the FCC actually doesn't track. Diving back into the relationship between the customer and the internet service provider, though, what we see is the ISP contract agreements restrict customer recovery significantly. And I'm going to highlight two particular clauses. This is in a Comcast Xfinity agreement. And what you're looking at is entitled to requests made within 20 days of an interruption, and you'll just receive a pro rate of credit for interruption exceeding 24 hours. And as below, except as unless specifically prohibited by law, this is the credit that shall be your sole and exclusive remedy for an interruption of services. So that's it. You get a discount. You get a little bit of discount, and within these contracts, they get to use the terminology that best suits them and most benefits them. One of the ones that comes up most frequently is the reasonable network management practices. They get to determine how to manage their network. There is minimal oversight. There's no transparency. There's no notice necessarily of what's going on. And so we face these issues where they get to determine what services, how they're provided, when they're provided. And if they decide to make any changes to those, they don't have to tell you that anything's happening. What does all this boil down to? Well, in between 2014 and 2018, there were 141,000 complaints about internet services to the FCC. This is the data that they've published and processed. So that boils down to about 387 complaints per day to the FCC about a problem with their internet services. Now, about a third of those are billing issues, but that means that we're still looking at 90,000 complaints over a 4-year period that are regarding services and access and privacy and interference and equipment issues. And we need to find a way to make sure that that's starting to get resolved. When we look at cost, the average monthly cost of home internet service in the United States, and again, this is for a lower level of service, a lower tier of service, not gigabit internet. 25, we're looking at a service that would be 25 megabits per second or 3 megabits per second. So, a Zoom phone call, maybe 2 without interruption. You're looking at $60 a month, which means your average cost per day is about $2 a month. So your average cost per hour is about 8 cents per hour. So for those, we look back at that contract clause, we're seeing maybe if your internet goes down for a couple hours, or if it goes down to a day, you're seeing very, very minimal return on what you're going to see for the harms that you've suffered by losing access to it. But what does the person actually lose when that internet connection goes down? They're unable to connect to work. They're unable to attend school. They're unable to access remote medical services. They're unable to access government documents. They're unable to access courts, and they're unable to order household necessities. I mean, that's a disconnection from the world at this point in time, particularly for those in rural environments where some of this may not be available at all, and their only outlet is to the world when everything is shut down. That's a significant problem, and be perfectly honest, it just ain't right that the ISPs get to have that much control. So what would a more equitable solution look like is sort of my intention with the remainder. For somebody working from home, you're going to be operating, you're going to be functioning, and inevitably, we all have this. It doesn't matter where in the country you are, what happens, the internet goes out. And inevitably, we all scream, we shout, we yell, we get frustrated because we're in the middle of something and we need our internet connection in order to continue doing what we're doing. As soon as that happens, the customer has a couple of options. Either they can wait for the service to come up and they can send a message, or they can hop on the phone and verify what's going on and call their internet service provider and say, hey, I've lost internet connection. I need my internet back up. I'm losing access to services. Immediately, that message will go over to our gloriously bright and shiny internet service provider. And the internet service provider can then take that specific information and make a determination and say, well, yeah, the internet service is out. Okay, let's look at what happened. Was there a cable cut in the region due to construction? Was there flooding that caused an outage? Was it within our control, or was it outside of our control? And they can quickly respond to the customer and send them back that message, letting them know, here's what we found based on your complaint. It opens the case study for them and says, you know, you're entitled to this much of a refund because you have lost services. But that doesn't necessarily address the harms that came up for the customer. And so it will also provide them with a link. And inside that link will basically be a question to the customer that says, do you want to escalate this issue? And once the customer receives that email, they'll have a choice. They can either take the percentage discount on their next monthly bill because it was a small thing and they didn't suffer any real harms, or they can escalate the issue to the Federal Communications Commission and they can say, no, there were real harms suffered. And these are the things that happened. I wasn't able to meet my court date. I wasn't able to meet my filing date. I wasn't able to register to vote. I wasn't able to do these varying things because I lost connection to the internet. Once the customer escalates the issue, they file out with what happened. They say, here's what happened. Here were the exact harms that I suffered. Here was the issues that I took. And here's what I need done. And they file that complaint, and that complaint gets sent to both the Internet Service Provider and the Federal Communications Commission. And this is where the Federal Communications Commission can come in and step in with an ombudsperson. At which point, because the FCC, or because the Internet Service Provider has already received the complaint and noticed that they were escalating the issue, the ombudsperson reaches out to the Internet Service Provider to request further details of what the ISP found based on that complaint information. And over a 10-day request period, the ISP is required to respond. If they don't respond within, so the ombudsperson reaches out to the ISP and they have 10 days to request the information to that Internet Service Provider, because it's going to take the ombudsperson to go through it a little bit. As you saw with 141,000 complaints, we're going to require some staff in order to manage this, and there's going to take a little time to process these requests. Since the ISP has already had a 10-day notice period based on when that email went out saying we're going to escalate this, they've already had time to start putting together materials. So they have 5 days to respond to the ombudsperson from the FCC and provide that specific information. If they fail to respond within 5 days after the FCC has requested this information, it triggers an automatic decision in favor of the consumer, at which point the FCC can award whatever they deem is appropriate. If the ISP, however, sends that information, then the ombudsperson has 10 days for the FCC to evaluate the ISP's determination as to what caused the outage and whether or not it was within the ISP's control. Here's the big consumer benefit to this, is that the internet is complicated. Most people don't understand how it works. Most people don't understand the interconnectivity, not only between you and your internet service provider, but the internet service provider and the varying entities that are, we refer to as third-party edge service providers. So your Netflixes, your Hulus, was it their site that was down, or was there a distributed denial of service attack where somebody was actually attacking the network itself at the time? Now, the ombudsperson then could provide a mediation that understand, and this is a person that's going to be able to provide the mediative services because they understand both the technological issues at play and the legal implications that go with them. So when we're talking about the process from here, if this goes on, once the FCC has received that data and the ombudsperson processes it, if the data is inconclusive, they can now begin an online portal through the federal government. So with using the federal government access, they open this online portal and then they begin to seek further information from the consumer. Okay, were you able to file the court accordingly? Did the court give you an extension on filing? Were you able to register in a different way? Essentially determining whether or not the issue is still ongoing or if the harm has been suffered and it will just be suffered continuously and it still needs some redressability. Playing the mediator, they can then serve under synchronous or asynchronous communication through the portal, allowing the consumer to tell the harms that they've suffered, to show, hey, you provided me no notice. You provided me no information that this was happening. You didn't warn me it was happening. And if this was an issue that was preventable by the ISP, or they could have provided notice, and that customer then could have scheduled their phone call at a different time or moved up their services and worked around the outage that was being planned, then certain amount of resolution might be able to be resolved from this, which of course inevitably will lead to more happy customers. The big benefit for the ISPs, of course, out of this is that they're getting unbiased and informed mediator to aid in the complaint process, rather than taking their customer service people and just having them be yelled at by the customers that are calling in. They can now have somebody that stands in the middle if there's a bigger issue at play. They can improve their practices for consumer notice and reporting. Where are the services actually available? Are the services what we're promising to be available? And at the end of whatever takes place between this consumer and the ISP, there's a binding contract for the outcome. For the consumer, they have oversight to hold the ISP accountable. Under their agreement, they have no way to hold the ISP accountable for outages. The financial compensation for lost services, financial compensation for the actual harms. They get documentation as well. So even if it's found that the ISP isn't liable, because the consumer has the ability to say, hey, I lost internet connection and I wasn't able to go to work or school or attend any of my mediation sessions or my court hearing online because I didn't have internet. There was nothing I could do. And again, they too walk away with a binding contract of the outcome that gives them something to lean on and would be enforceable in the courts. For evaluating successes of this, we look at the ISP gets to see data about the performance of the network and where network improvements are required. We get to see monitoring of the number of complaints that are coming in. Are we going to see an increase or decrease when you have these added advantages? They get the data to show where new customers might be in the marketplace, because if they want to expand their services, well, where are those people? How do we get those people? They can see customer retention, and they can see data on customer service. Were they actually giving out discounts unnecessarily for problems that weren't theirs? For the consumer, they now have a regulatory agency assisting them. You also get to see, or they get to ensure that they're getting the services they're actually paying for. If they're paying for 1 gigabit Ethernet, but they're only getting 25 megabit Ethernet, well, then shouldn't they be paying less money for that? And this gives them a way to redress that issue. Of course, improved advertising for available services so that they know what is actually available at the time. But the most key one is that they're going to see actual redress for the harms that they suffered. If they missed work and they got fired, you have a problem because of things that were well beyond your control. And there was literally nothing you can do, particularly under the instances where you might have one internet service provider. One of the issues that we face, though, is that we're just not here yet. The recent Restoring Internet Freedom Order that was just passed by the FCC after remand, it reclassifies broadband as Title I, which means that the FCC has no oversight of the practices of broadband providers. Interestingly enough, it actually also removed an ombudsperson option that was placed into the Title II reclassification from 2015, which was the Open Internet Order. So with the FCC currently pushing away regulatory oversight from their authority over broadband networks. We're not really in a position to put this into place yet, but it doesn't make it less necessary than we are right now, especially considering the fact that we're facing an issue where so many people are trying to access all of the world from the internet. There's no in-person connections anymore. They have to attend work, they have to attend school, they have to do everything online. And as soon as that lifeline is cut from your house to the internet, you're without options potentially. And finding ways to redress that harm are key, especially when access is so controlled and so favorable to the internet service providers. So that's what I've put together for you today. Thank you very much for the National Center for Technology Dispute Resolution for having me, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. Fabulous, incredibly interesting. You brought a new dilemma to the table for us to think about, but not only that, you've also outlined a design framework for solving that, and quite stimulating. What I want to do now is acknowledge that we've reached the end of the, so to speak, formal hour, but it will be wonderful for anyone who could stay for a handful of minutes. Perhaps we can engage with our scholars for a time, and if you need to leave, we appreciate that you showed up. I checked the schedule, and there's not another Cyberweek event happening right now, but I know there are other things going on in your lives. I do want to say that I hope that you will join other Cyberweek events. There's one that's happening in an hour with Ana Gonzalez and Dan Rainey, and there's a whole slew of other things happening all week long. So please do join other events. But if you can spare another 5-7 minutes or so, it would be great if we could have some engagement with our scholars. So I want to first, as always, open it to the floor. You're welcome to put something in the chat for a specific panelist, or raise a question for all of them, or just make a comment. So thoughts?
I wanted to pipe in on Josh's presentation. I thought it was a fascinating application of ODR to an area I've never heard anyone talk about ADR being applied. And I think it leverages a lot of his background and expertise. But I just wanted to ask Josh, what do you think the path forward is? I mean, politically, do you think that a program like this could get passed? I mean, what sort of changes would need to happen, and what time frame would be required to make something like this happen?
Weirdly, there's a nice path forward with some other work I'm doing, which actually relates closer to the antitrust work that's being done in Congress right now. They're on a big antitrust kick, and if they start looking beyond Google and Apple and Facebook and start looking at the other monopolies in the world, you're going to start seeing them figure out that there is a lack of competition in these services. And at that point, we may see a push towards greater enforcement of competition to promote more internet service providers providing access to people around the country. So even if we don't see a White House and a Congress and a Senate transition, you still might see that as a path forward. If you do see a White House and a Senate transition, then we need to start moving our way back towards a Title II classification for broadband services, because that restores strict oversight authority to the FCC. They could reinstate the ombudsman principle from 2015, and then they could move forward with that. But that's 2 years to go down that path, and to go down the antitrust path could be even longer. It's just a matter of forcing this issue, which is problematic when the number 2 industry for lobbying in DC is telecommunications.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat that says, what do you think about the suggestion the internet should be treated as a utility? I have heard that suggested, but I have not heard a discussion about it. Thanks for that set of questions. Thank you.
So this is where I may have come in with my tech world. The utility argument is the center of the Title I versus Title II authority. If we classify broadband as Title II, it gets treated like a utility. It gets treated like your phone line at that point. They have the ability to make a lot more rules, enforce a lot more rules, enforce pricing structures. The FCC would have a lot more authority to do that. I personally think it should be. It's the internet has become our telephone. We don't use POTS lines, plain old telephone system lines anymore. We use the internet. We use voice over IP in order to communicate. And we need to treat the internet, be it text or be it voice, in the same way that we used to treat the phone system, because this is how we access everything. Before, we used to call up to a store and say, I want to place an order and pick something up. Now it's, I go onto Amazon or I go onto my local Shopify or whatever service you want to use, and you say, here's the things I want you to bring to my house. It's the same principle and the same outcome. And there's no reason we shouldn't treat the communication methodology the same.
Maybe we can take one more comment or question, and then I have a closing comment that I'd like all the panelists to consider answering. Any additional comments, some thought that people would like to contribute? Jan, please, yes.
Okay, I had a question and it flew away, but I have another one. Thank you, Josh and April and Chimdimma. I really appreciated all of your presentations. They're really valuable. I wanted to ask April about the APEC model rules. Are they designing an enforcement mechanism or bureaucracy? What are they doing to help it happen and function?
And I don't know the answer to
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And I wish I did. The model rules do talk about a complaint system, but beyond that, it doesn't really address what steps are going to be taken to force a provider out, to give them some kind of they do have a small window of opportunity once they get notice of a complaint to address it, but it doesn't go into all the details of how it will be addressed. So I still think there's opportunity and more work that needs to be done to flush that out. But overall, I'm not really sure.
So I'll give you another question. Thank you for giving your basic shot. My other question about your design thinking and the user experience of using these channels. I wanted to point out, I think I've done a lot of design work with users in the court, and one thing that I think we need to keep an eye on is the bureaucracy, their user experience, because unless they know how to answer all those citizen questions like Chimdimma was talking about, unless they have both the equipment and capacity and access to answer the user's needs, they're both going to be really frustrated. So I think the users and the administrators are really up there in terms of users that we need to track. So just a comment. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Martinez. I was just going to say, I hopefully have captured from April's wonderful list of citations in case someone's interested in following up to Professor Martinez's question about oversight or wants to read more. So there's another question here. We'll let another question sneak in. And let me ask mine so that the panelists can be pondering it while someone addresses this next question. Because for closing out of the panel, if each one of you would like to take a moment to talk about what you think the research agenda should include we've got some undergraduates on the call. We undoubtedly will have other graduate students watch this later, and both practitioners and scholars watch this at a later date. So if you would say what you think we should continue to be researching more about, or whether you think there's an area we haven't researched enough, and I'm talking about the field in general, what would you encourage us to do a little bit more or a lot more research on? That's my final question I'd like to ask each of you to consider saying something about. So while that's percolating, we hear from Jeffrey, is party verification being considered as part of the Trustmark design standard? I look back to Abernathy's white paper on the topic. So anyone want to comment on that?
I'm going to kick that to Colin, who wrote the book.
That's cheating. I don't know
I
if you can
know,
just call
sorry.
cold call. The professors get to call the students. The students don't get to call the professors. I am not aware of party verification being considered as part of Trustmark design standards. I don't think that Amy and I included it in our new handshake vision. I know that there's some pretty creative things that are happening out there with party verification, and I think we need to look at those technologies. That's not something that only matters for ODR. Party verification matters in a wide variety of contexts, from health records to banking to different things. So it's a huge consideration within trust and safety. So maybe we can leverage that within ODR, but I don't know of anyone who's focused specifically on dispute resolution that's looked at party verification in terms of including that. So I think, Jeff, you raise a very interesting question somebody needs to think about.
And I'll just say it did not come up in my review of those 13 documents as being a principle or something to look at.
Sounds like a great area for more research. And let me just say, as someone who is a pracademic, I really mean by saying research, whether that's something that's done in the formal institutions of the academy or whether it's done by practitioners. And in chatting with some folks online earlier before we really got rolling, we talked about how this is a truly multidisciplinary field. So whether it's a technologist doing research and then their research helping move us forward around ODR, or it's someone from the ADR field, we need everyone, I would argue, in this multidisciplinary effort, including people who are thinking about governing and the role of government in business. So let me turn it back to the panel for your concluding remarks, and maybe we can go in the order of presentation. So Chimdimma, do you have some thoughts about what we need to research more? Oh, I believe you're still muted.
Sorry about that, so sorry. So I'd like to say first that so much has been done in the field. Personally, I just learned about online dispute resolution about 2-3 years ago. And when I go online, try to read about it, I see articles by Mr. Colin Rule from 2000. So I think that the field has been alive for a really long time. So I believe so much has been done, but what I would like to see more of is really technology in the courts, especially for, like in this part of the world. I feel like online alternative dispute resolution processes have sort of gained a bit of a foothold, but I'd like to see more of technology in the courts, because here a lot of things are still analog. Judges still write by hand. A lot of our case files are still, hard copies. So I'd like to see more of technology in the courts, if maybe at least we'll start with the small claims courts, taking processes online. So I'd like to see more of that research in online dispute resolution. And hopefully I'll be part of it. I know I've mentioned to you, Ms. Wing, about pursuing a doctorate in online dispute resolution. So I look forward to assisting as well.
Absolutely, and I think that all of you have made clear the power of your own work in being forward thinking. You are not behind us, you are in front of us. So both in innovative thinking, research, and literally in technological innovation and design innovation. So we're looking forward to your next project. April.
So I have kind of a passion for intellectual disabilities and for special education. And I think that that's a huge growth area for conflict dispute resolution. I know there's already mediation and there's conflict processes, but I think to actually give a voice and to empower individuals who have the disability, not always to be working through a parent or a teacher or a social worker, but giving them a voice. And I know that's not always possible, but I think that if there are ways that we could creatively design systems that give that, talking about the guided, the drop-down menus and other things, and just the problem solving and the guided triage, maybe there's a way that we could work that, and not just necessarily for individuals with intellectual disabilities, but it really could be anybody who doesn't have a voice, whether it's young people who have to have, you know, someone who's under the age of 18 or is a minor, and they're always having someone else speak for them. But if they could go online, I mean, my 10-year-old knows more about her tablet and the internet and communicating with people than I do. And so surely she could, I mean, she does, she tells her friends, she found her sneaking videos onto TikTok. I don't even know how to use TikTok. How do I get that off? You know, about her cat. So there are ways that I think that we could give voice to people who we don't typically, we think we have to control that, but they could take it for themselves.
Fabulous. Again, both research needed around the technology to make that happen, but bringing the ethical perspective about it being important. Thank you, April. Josh, please, what are you thinking?
Far be it from me to step in and say what the field needs to do, being a very, very new entrant into the field. Where I think I can offer the best insight is that ODR is a powerful message. Access to resolution, access to services, access to everyone theoretically follows once you have that dispute mechanism in front of you. Joining the fight that is ongoing right now to close the digital divide, to bring service access to people, even if it's local. I know AT&T provided several thousand hotspots to students in the San Jose region this going into the fall term of this year. Being on board with ways with the service providers to say, hey, we want to reach out and we want to expand these services, working with those that are providing the services, working with the California Public Utilities Commission, the New York Utilities Commission, the FCC, and demonstrating they are restricting access to these services to those that need them most right now, when they choose not to retain oversight. Painting that story, painting that picture is a very, very valuable resource.
Very powerful point about addressing inequality by being a bridge through the framing of research, but also its application. Thank you, Josh. Powerful themes throughout. I don't want to speak over the voices of our panel, but I will just say issues around accessibility, issues around trust, and issues around kind of continuing to develop the infrastructure inside the field and outside the field with partners seem like some of the important themes. And can I just ask everyone to give a round of applause to our fantastic panel. A pleasure. Thank you for staying up so late, Chimdimma. And it's exciting to have people from all over the globe participate. Thank you for staying on, participants. It was wonderful to have you. And I look forward to seeing you all at another Cyberweek event. Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
That was great.
Bye.